Well, family history.
Hello, my name is Ron Caldwell, and I'm your moderator of this historical reflection prepared by Jim Caldwell on the John Caldwell family history. Now, being of Scottish descent, this is a low-cost production, as you will soon realize.
John Caldwell married Elizabeth Robertson in 1828, and they had 5 children: William, Janet, John, Margaret, and Robert. Unfortunately, their mother Elizabeth died prematurely at the age of 32 in the year 1837. It was 13 years later, in 1850, that John and his 5 children immigrated to the United States. The voyage took 6 weeks by boat to arrive in New York City. From there, they proceeded on to Albany, New York, and then to the Erie Canal at Buffalo, New York, to take a lake steamer to Milwaukee through the Great Lakes. And then from Milwaukee, they took an ox team to make the approximate 100-mile trip to the Arlington Prairie. We're very fortunate to have this, the original ox yoke, used by John, and it's now mounted on the wall of the Ron Caldwell residence. See the name emblem. Now, John arrived at what was known as the Wilson Hotel in Decorah Township of Columbia County, and then settled on an 80-acre parcel in Smoky Hollow that is now known as the Lawrence and Margaret Sager Farm, located in what we would call the northwest corner of the township of Arlington in Columbia County, Wisconsin, USA. Now, this site may have been chosen as it snuggled right in to the south of some wooden bluffs that may have helped protect the farmstead from the strong winds of the prairie. So, as you drive on Interstate I-90-94, look to the west as you drive north of Highway 60, and in about 1.5 miles you will see this set of buildings, which is the original John Caldwell farmstead. Well, it's interesting to note as we look at the house here at the homestead that several years ago, when the Sager family remodeled their home, they discovered that deep into this house is the original log cabin that John built when he homesteaded. It's still there.
Probably right behind the picture window.
Yes, right behind the picture window. Now, after settling in on the Arlington Prairie, John Caldwell met Esther Stevenson, and they were married in 1863. They had one child named James Craig Caldwell, and he was born in 1864. Farming was in the Caldwell blood, as John expanded the acreage that he owned by acquiring another 320 acres, therefore bringing the holdings up to a total of 400 acres in what we call the Sager Farm. John Caldwell died at the age of 71 in 1879, and he's laid to rest at the Arlington Township Cemetery, where this very restored gravestone marks his burial. This stone was restored by his great-grandchildren, John, Bill, Ross, and Lyle Caldwell. From here we will trace the ancestry of John's youngest child, Robert Caldwell, born in Scotland in 1835. At the age of 15, Robert arrived in the United States, and in 1850 he met Elizabeth Caldwell. This is the Robert Caldwell family Bible that records the marriages and the births of their children. This Bible is presently with Ron Caldwell at his home on the Arlington Prairie. This gravesite, which we refer to as the Robert Caldwell plot, is where Robert and his wife and each of their children and their spouse, a total of 14 graves. This plot is located in the southeast corner of the Arlington Cemetery, while the John Caldwell marker is in the southwest corner of the cemetery. Now, Robert and his wife settled on this 380-acre farm that is located on the southern end of the Arlington Prairie on the Dane County, Columbia County line. Robert took out a mortgage for $8,000 to buy the farm that he paid back 10 years later. This is the scene, absent the buildings and the corn crop, that Robert must have seen moving down from the Sager farm.
And I think, Ronald, all would agree that this is some of the finest farmland in Wisconsin, and a step up from where they originally settled north of here.
We can say that Robert had good judgment.
Right.
Now, this farmstead and farm is in Dane County, on the very northern edge of Dane County in Vienna Township, and is the farmstead of Robert's future father-in-law, the Caldwells. This is located right across the road from the acreage that Robert and Elizabeth purchased, and we're viewing this from what would be the top of the hill on the west end of the farm.
And wouldn't you say, Ronald, that Robert married well here?
I would say that was a good union. We have a look at the original homestead that Robert and his wife settled into. Robert and Elizabeth were a very productive couple, having 9 children. They probably needed a large family to get all the work done. This structure, before being added on to, is where Robert and family dwelled in Section 35, Township of Arlington. It's hard to imagine, isn't it, that 9 children and the mom and the dad in this, what was about 600 square feet, and probably just one story.
I would guess just one story, as it's been a lot of additions since that time. That had to be a pretty cozy situation, and probably helped heat the house with that much many people in a 600-foot area.
Apparently Robert was a leader in the community, as he was a founding member of the Arlington Mutual Fire Insurance Company, which exists yet today. It is reported further that Robert's farm was the very first policy written by the Arlington Mutual Fire Insurance Company. The first child was John R., born on March 2nd, 1863, and then William K., known as W.K., born on January 25th, 1865. Next, Adam, in 1867, who died at the age of 5, and we believe that a gate fell on him. Then came David in 1869, and the twins,
Mary and Martha in 1870, then Charles 1871, and finally Thomas in 1876, and then Clark, who died in infancy. I will point out here that this is Tom Caldwell, John R., Chet, Dave, and W.K., and unfortunately the twins Mary and Martha are not shown in this picture. Unfortunately, Robert died in 1885 intestate, meaning he had no will, which created estate problems. Fortunately, the eldest child, John R., at the age of 22, stepped up to the occasion and took leadership of the family to keep it together, as his mother Elizabeth died 3 years later when the youngest, Tom, was only 12 years old. Reading from the court records and the original land abstract sets up that Robert Caldwell died intestate May 20th, 1885, and that he left surviving him as next of kin and heirs as law as follows: your petitioner, his widow, and 7 children, with oldest child, John R., of full age, and 6 other minor children. John R. is given credit for keeping the remaining family of 7 together, as now both parents were gone. John was now 25 years old. In fact, the family did thrive holding things together, the various real estate holdings, all of them together on the Arlington. Now let's turn to a word about each of Robert and Elizabeth's children. First of all, John R., here in the center, married Elizabeth Morrison in 1889, 1 year after his mother died. They had 4 children: Robert, Jenny, Marjorie, and Jesse. John R. owned 320 acres that was farmed right across the road from his dad Robert's farm. And this is located in Section 2, Range 9, east of Vienna Township, Dane County, Wisconsin. This farm is now owned by Marguerite, or Peg Caldwell, the widow of Ross Caldwell, and her son, myself, Ron Caldwell. This is now a Century Farm. John R. was very active in other activities. He was the Dane County Highway Commissioner, and we remember stories about John acquiring road right-of-ways as picking the coldest day of the year to acquire road and intersection right-of-ways. He'd pull up in his vehicle and roll the windows down just enough to speak and let the property owner stand in the cold. Somehow it had a way of moving the negotiations along faster. Also, John R. was president of the Morrisonville State Bank, which we're now looking at. That bank did not make it through the Depression, as it merged with the DeForest Bank to form the DeForest Morrisonville State Bank, now called DMB. Well, we recall stories, Jim, from John's nephews, our fathers, Ross and Lyle Caldwell, about sending them out to tell the shareholders that their deposits were frozen and the stock was not only of no value, but they might have to also pay in, as it was assessable stock, at the rate of 2 times the par value. We hope we don't see times like that again. John R. passed away in 1940 at age 77. W.K. owned and farmed 240 acres south and adjacent to John R.'s farm in Section 2, Range 9 east of the Vienna Township in Dane County. W.K. was considered an excellent horseman. He could break almost any animal to ride. He loved horses, and though smaller than his other brothers, he was very agile and could shimmy up a rope or onto a rooftop, as he had no fears of height. W.K. passed away in 1947 at the age of 82. Well, next was David,
who married Mary Wilson. They had 3 children, Marvel, Dessa, and Lyman, who died as an infant. Now Dave farmed 200 acres that were also adjacent to the east of his dad's farm, located in section 36 and range 9 east in the town of Arlington. Dave passed away at the age of 67 in 1936. The family subsequently sold this farm to the University of Wisconsin Agricultural Experimental Farms, where it headquarters the Swine Research Farm today. Next are the twin girls, Mary and Martha. Gee, must have been 2 names out of the Bible, Jim.
Yes, right.
Now Mary married Colin Morrison, who was conveniently the cashier of the Morrisonville State Bank. It appeared that they had it all in the family, and what we're viewing here is their farm. I always knew Mary as Aunt Mame, and they lived on this farm, which was adjacent to the John R. Caldwell farm on the southeast edge of the John R. farm in Vienna Township.
Right on County Trunk I.
Well, the Morrison name was pretty popular, as 3 of Robert's children married Morrisons, 2 of them to brothers and sisters. Mary and Tom Caldwell married brother and sisters Colleen and Jesse Morrison, and of course the Morrison family is the founding family of Morrisonville, Wisconsin, located only 2.5 miles from the farm homestead. Mary and Colleen Morrison had 2 children, Russell Morrison and Jane Morrison, and Jane subsequently married Tom Webster. The other twin, Martha, married Lee Gates of Ryle. They had 1 child, Agnes Gates. Cleve ran the Gates Caldwell lumber yard in Ryle with his brother-in-law, Charles Caldwell. The next to be born was Charles Caldwell, or Chet as he was affectionately referred to, who married Ag McMillan. They had 1 child, Allison Caldwell, who married Oliver Grasscamp. As we mentioned, Chet ran the Gates Caldwell lumberyard in Ryle with his brother-in-law. The last of the Robert Caldwell family is Thomas, or T.A., who married Jesse Morrison. Jesse was one of the before said double family marriages. Here we have a likeness of Tom, or T.A., and Jesse soon after they were married. And Jesse was affectionately referred to as Nano by all of her grandchildren. Tom and Jesse farmed the home farm owned by his dad, Robert. And this home farm of 240 acres is in section 35 of Arlington Township and is now owned by Tom's grandson, Jim Caldwell. And also, this is a Wisconsin Century Farm. Here we have the state recognition for the Century Farm. The farm, of course, being the Robert Caldwell farm that has come through the Caldwell family and is now owned by Jim Caldwell. Been in the family since 1868. T.A. or Tom Caldwell had this home built about 1905. And of course it's where his family grew up. The house is just adjacent to his father's home, that is Robert, since however remodeled and since it was originally built.
It's the farmhouse, Ronald, as you remember, it had a little porch on the southeast side that was lost in the remodeling, but largely still intact.
Also, TA had this huge barn for its day erected. It was constructed with square pegs and square-headed nails, a very well-built building. They milked cows here for years and years, until in the 1940s sometime. And you can imagine that barn holds one lot of straw and hay when it's packed full. The Tom Caldwell family had 4 children. Ross, born 555, Lyle, January 31st, 1907, Elizabeth, August 30th, 1910, and Margaret, March 10th, 1913. And then, in another likeness, we have them in a little older age with Ross, Margaret, Elizabeth, and Lyle. The Caldwell family had developed a reputation for breeding workhorses, namely Percherons and Clydes. They sold horses far and wide to such family as the Elines in Milwaukee, who owned the Schlitz Brewery. This bill of sale and partnership accounting illustrates the horse trading that the brothers conducted, as in this transaction, where they traded 26 horses for the 320 acres of land in North Dakota. This sheet shows the detailed accounting for this transaction between the brothers. This was typical of the many transactions that they conducted for horses and land. Of course, all were done through the Morrisonville State Bank. There were many stories about the horse trading activities, but most of all they had a reputation for their honesty and their integrity of the deal.
It's amazing, Ronald, to see the detail of accounting that was done back in those earlier years. These people had a true instinct for business.
And it appears like everything had to be completely reconciled.
Absolutely.
Well, there have been a lot of stories of 2 brothers who are very close, but they were never more close than they are in this picture, when on Lyle's first day of school, it was Ross who was taking the 2 of them to school in their buggy with their pony. And there were also many stories about Ross and Lyle driving the sisters home from school in Morrisonville and Poinette, like in this type of buggy or another one like it. The story is that the boys would leave the whip at the intersection about a half a mile from home, so the parents would not know the desire for the speed of the journey. Well, the oldest of the 4 children of T.A. and Jesse was Ross, and he married Marguerite Ann Wilson on September 16, 1933. And they had 1 son, Ronald, a July 4th, 1934 baby. And Ross attended the UW-Madison and had started studies to be a dentist. However, he heeded the call of the land and came back to the John R. Caldwell farm to work in partnership with his younger brother Lyle. These 2 brothers, known throughout all of southern Wisconsin as the Caldwell brothers, farmed together all of their lives. Ross was always remembered as being able to fix almost anything on the farm, from welding to equipment repairs, and when it came to livestock, there was no one better than his brother Lyle. Well, here we see the first John Deere combine that ever came into southern Wisconsin. It was about 1942. And you see on the International tractor is Lyle. He was always on the tractor moving the equipment ahead. And you'll see up on the combine is his brother Ross, who was using the steering up there to move the header up and down, and there's Ross's son Ron sitting there with him. They also had the first John Deere baler in the area. They almost did things together. When they planted corn, the one would drive the tractor, usually Lyle, and Ross would sit in the back looking, examining the planter as they went ahead. And when I'd come home from school, I remember of hearing them laughing away out there, the two of them enjoying what they were doing, smoking Chesterfield cigarettes like they were going out of style. The one thing that they had a failing on, Jim, was chocolate-covered peanuts.
They did enjoy that treat. They worked hard, but they sure looked forward to that little break.
Well, Ross and Marguerite retired to Arlington, where they lived many happy years, and he took up golf. Actually, both of the brothers took up golf, and they did a lot of curling on ice during their later years and enjoyed that with the old-timers, as they called it. And Ross passed away February 24th, 1992. Ross and Marguerite's one son, Ron, succeeded Ross in running the farm operation, as well as eventually being appointed as the state director of the Wisconsin Farmers Home Administration, and in later years worked as an ombudsman at the Wisconsin State Department of Agriculture. Ron has 4 children: Melanie, Radley, Nancy, and Kay. Ron and Nancy Marceau Cron married on March 25th, 1995, in a very loving marriage. Next born after Ross was Lyle Morrison Caldwell, middle named after his mother's maiden name, and was the second oldest in the family. Lyle married Gertrude Eggum on September 8th, 1938. They had 3 children: Joyce, born September 18th, 1939, James, July 30th, 1943, and Judy, January 14th, 1950. Lyle had a true love of the land. We remember him sitting on these steps on Sunday and in the evenings just to view the land.
He loved the lay of the land, and he and Ross lived it and worked it, as they have farming totally in their blood as the Caldwell family tradition.
Lyle lived on the farm his entire life, and in this farmhouse built by his dad Tom. Lyle and his brother Ross were like 2 peas in a pod and liked to have the latest in farm equipment. Ross and Lyle built several of these buildings during the early 1940s. The corn crib and the large round roof cattle shed where they fed out beef cattle. Due to material shortages during the war years, they had to use a lot of used lumber. Also, much of the cattle yard cement work was poured by World War II German prisoners. Lyle had a real special attraction for horses, especially American saddlebred 3 and 5 gaited saddle horses. And of course, the horse business ran in the Caldwell family bloodline. And this is the horse barn where Lyle kept his horses and worked with his nephew Ron when he was working with horses and ponies. This is the converted hog barn into the horse barn. Lyle was a very thoughtful and caring father and husband, as the family really never wanted for anything. He had a neat sense of humor, as well as his brother Ross had, and they both had a fine, keen sense for business. Lyle passed away December 22nd, 1973, and Gertrude on November 29th, 1988. Fortunately, Marguerite, or Peg Caldwell, Ross's wife, is still with us and a vibrant 90 years old. Peg's helped us with some stories and background material for which we are very appreciative. Well, and Gertie's children, Joyce pursued a career in the insurance industry and had 3 children, Clary, Susan, and Lisa. He made a career of the banking business. He married Julie Brunner and had 2 children, Jacqueline and Jonathan. Judy had a career in teaching in the elementary school system. She married Bob Hughes, and they had 2 boys, Robert and Ryan. Well, Elizabeth Jane, the 3rd child and the first daughter of Tom and Jessie, was a beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, curly-headed little girl. She was nicknamed Biddo by her nephew Ron. Elizabeth graduated from Carroll College, where she met Donovan Wilson of Poynette. Don and Elizabeth were married August 22nd, 1935, at the farm in their parents' home, where she wore her mother's wedding gown. Don operated a grocery business in Poynette, and then purchased and operated Wilson's IGA and the Little Brown Jug in Beaver Dam. Don passed away in November of 1985. They had 2 children, a daughter, Janice Jean, born December 20th, 1937, and a son, Robert Thomas, born May 2nd, 1942. Janice pursued a career in dental office work and married Eddie Zahn, a teacher, in July 19, 1958. They had 3 children, Mary Beth, Bruce, and Jay. Now, Elizabeth and Don's son, Bob, has had a career in teaching and married Sharon Oliver on August 7, 1971, and they have 3 children, Matthew, Michelle, and Jennifer. The last child of Tom and Jessie is Margaret Caldwell, her middle name named after her grandfather's favorite aunt. However, she was given the nickname Bep by her brothers. Margaret graduated from Poynette High School as a salutatorian and also from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Home Ec. Margaret was introduced to her husband-to-be, Wayne Lewis, by her sister and brother-in-law. Wayne was a civil engineer and was working on the reconstruction of Highway 51 at the time. Margaret and Wayne were married on June 12, 1937, when Margaret also wore her mother's wedding dress. Wayne subsequently pursued a career with Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, and in this picture, Wayne's brother is standing up at the marriage, and Elizabeth, Margaret's sister, is also standing. Margaret and Wayne had 4 children. David, born June 11th, 1938. Next, Nancy, born June 14th, 1941. And then Glenn, on June 6th, 1943. And finally Tom, born November 25th, 1946. David is a college professor and married Judith Grover, April 8th, 1962. And they have 2 children named Lynn and Ann. Nancy, a teacher in Racine, married Dan Block, April 24th, 1964, and they have 2 children, Margaret and Michael. Glenn pursued a career in real estate in Georgia and had 2 children, Lisa and Dustin. And Tom, a social worker in Alaska, married Ann Byrne on July 11th, 1971. They have 2 children, Stuart and Joseph. And here's a later day picture, starting from the left. Tom, Dave, Glenn, and Nancy. Tom and Jessie Caldwell passed along many great family values of good work ethics, honesty, integrity, as well as a genuine, strong belief in God and not to take His name in vain. Tom and Jesse's children always maintained a strong and special friendship that has lasted lifelong. Hopefully these strong family ties and commitments will continue for generations in the future. We have a wonderful heritage that we hope will be appreciated and preserved for the future.
This video is a salute to the John Caldwell family and his many heirs, and we hope that you will find that it serves as a good historical resource for generations in the future. It's been our pleasure, Ronald Caldwell, who was the moderator, and yours truly, Jim Caldwell, who ran the camera, to bring you this video. We hope you enjoy.